Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Darylyn and today we are going to be talking about something that's kind of like been burning a hole in the back of my brain for a minute now. And I've had a couple people ask me about it. So I thought I'd kind of tie some thoughts together and see if I can help some people out. And if you are thinking about this too, then how fortunate we are. Today we're going to be talking about the kind of like Anthurium boom that's going on right now and kind of some things to think about and some tips to consider when you are in the market to purchase Anthurium, and especially anything that is expensive or fancy. So I think that we've kind of all learned over the course of the last few years that fancy plants kind of like surge in popularity, and there's trends in the plant world just the same as there is in like fashion or in anything else. And with plants especially, it can sometimes be really difficult to really know for sure that you're getting what you think you're paying for. It's not like other like consumer products where there's like regulations and there's inspections and there's like money back guarantees. It's really easy to get like soft scammed a little bit. I think a soft scam is kind of just when, you know, people don't really know 100% for sure what they have and they're selling it as what they were told it is, but like there's like a canyon of difference between what they're telling you it is and like what it actually is. And then also too, just it's good to just be aware of what the intrinsic value on certain things is and like just kind of like things to look out for to make sure that you're doing the best that you can to actually get what you think you're paying for. So why are we kind of talking about this right now? Again, specifically with Anthurium, I think that as of right now, it's very clear that it is one of the few genuses left in the aroid world and kind of in the popular houseplant world where prices are still really high. You can definitely still see plants, small baby plants selling in the mid to upper triple digits, depending on what the parents are, what the heritage is, what the pedigree is, what the genetics are, what they look like, where they're from, who bred them. And a lot of people are kind of trying to cash in on this last gasp of the plant boom by hybridizing like literally every single thing under the sun. And then some people will just sell seeds, some people will sell seedlings. So I guess let's just kind of start off with like what makes an Anthurium fancy, like why are these plants more valuable than others, and kind of like what to look out for and like how much is a lot to pay. And hopefully this is helpful if any of you are thinking about getting into Anthurium or thinking about saving up or dropping a lot of money on a plant that you feel like is special and you want it. Like maybe these are some things to think of. So some of the things that would make an Anthurium in particular more valuable would be dark foliage. Dark plants in general have a bit of a following, but Anthurium specifically, really, really dark leaves is a factor in how valuable an Anthurium is. Probably the most famous example of this is the Tazula plant's dark form, Ace of Spades. These plants put out leaves that are almost black. And really, really dark black leaves is a feature that Anthurium breeders are pretty much always chasing. So something that's extra dark is gonna probably be pricey. Another thing that kind of goes along with the dark leaves is just like colorful emergent leaves. There are some types of Anthurium that put out the most spectacular colors with their new leaves. Red crystallinums that are just like beautiful, brilliant reds. Some of the dock blocks put out like purple emergence. Even better if any of that color is retained in the long run. There's certain forms of things like the black velvet Eastern Panama where the emergence are like very red and that's considered very desirable and it's not a key characteristic of the species at large. That's something to also take into consideration. Like moving on from like their physical characteristics, which are like really important. I mean, most plants are not, you know, coveted unless they're beautiful. Beyond that, like the plant's pedigree can also make it very valuable, meaning that it came from, you know, a prestigious breeder, somebody who has documented like their plant's breeding line all the way back to when it was collected in the wild. They were, you know, procured from the people that originally collected them. It's known and confirmed that the plant is a certain ecotype or a certain specific member of a group that came from a specific place that's distinct from other places. It can be confirmed that the plant is in fact that ecotype. It's documented. And then also on top of that, there are specific lines that are called clones. And these are things where like the plant had produced like a mutation, and the mutation is only really guaranteed to be passed on via, cuttings of node propagations and not with breeding. Like if you have a prestigious plant and you self that plant, the seedlings from the self-pollination are not considered to be as pure as the original plant. So there's like a difference between, they call this the selfing like F2, which is like a whole genetic like terminology thing that I'm not gonna get into, but it's like distinct from the original plant. Whereas if the plant puts out an offset or is grown from a cutting of the plant, that's a clone. So that's different. And those specific genetics can be very coveted, and that's the reason why some plants are so expensive, like into the thousands of dollars. And then the last thing to take into consideration is that for some of these plants, being able to prove that they've been sourced ethically is huge. There are a lot of examples of popular plants, especially Anthurium, being poached. There was just a scandal recently about Anthurium dressleri. There was a section of rainforests in Panama where an entire ecotype was just stripped out, and then the forest was burned. I'm like a third-hand source on that, but that's what I was like told happened. So you have to be really careful about who you're buying certain plants from, because otherwise it's really easy to end up supporting poaching and non-sustainable practices. So now that we've kind of established like the value behind like what makes Anthurium fancy and desirable, let's kind of get into the tips for when you are trying to buy one. And I think that this can be helpful for someone who's like a more casual collector and just wants something that they think is going to look pretty, and also someone who's like an elite level collector who wants like all the crown jewels. These are applicable, I think, in both situations. But so the first thing I'd like to address is what's called complex hybrids. This is what happens when you have a hybrid where one or more of the parents was also a hybrid. So basically, unless the parent plant's parents, that the hybridization were very prestigious, documented, pedigreed plants, or they had extremely beautiful, desirable characteristics, like complex hybrids are just not very sought after, and they're not worth very much. The reason that there are so many complex hybrids floating around is because it is just so much easier to cross-pollinate like whatever you happen to have at the moment that's blooming, rather than, be really diligent about pollinating things and like keeping, the species pure. And the Anthurium hybrids pretty easily for the most part. And there's just a lot of demand right now. People are buying seeds, they're buying seedlings before they're grown out on the off chance that they're going to get something that looks really, really amazing for cheap. And I'm here to tell you that when you're buying a complex hybrid, chances are that you probably are not getting what you think you're getting unless that seller has pictures of both the mother plant and the pollen donation plant, and they know where both of those plants came from. So it's not that big of a deal to buy Anthurium seeds or seedlings with like kind of like messy genetics that like don't really have any kind of pedigree if you're not paying very much for them. But there are starting to be a lot of these like cheap, low quality complex hybrids like floating around in Indonesia and like getting shipped over and being offered by plant shops, and plant shops labeling them as things that they're very plainly not. And to someone who's been in the Anthurium hobby for a long time, it can oftentimes be very obvious that what plants are being advertised as is impossible. I recently saw something where a shop was advertising a plant that they called Doriaki X Clarinervium. And to me, my alarm bells went off in my head because A, like the plant really honestly just looked like a Clarinervium. But B, Clarinervium are known for being very limited in what other Anthurium they can hybridize with, because what I believe is because they're actually from like the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, whereas like most other common Anthurium are from South America and the Amazon basin. And my theory is that the lineage of those plants just like they've been separated for too long. They're just not genetically similar enough that they can cross-pollinate anymore. And I know for a fact that the Doriaki can be hybridized with the crystallinum, and that the Clarinervium cannot be hybridized with the crystallinum. So to me, in my brain, it does not make sense that a Clarinervium could be crossed with a Doriaki. Like, they're probably just not compatible. And like, I could be wrong about that. Like, if I am wrong and you have evidence, like, that's fine. Like, we can talk about it in the comments. But like, that's a red flag to me that this just looks like a Clarinervium. Like, this shop doesn't have the parent plants. Like, they're not showing like, we crossed these plants. And also, like, I have reason to believe that this cross like wouldn't be possible. That's like the kind of thing I'm talking about. You also get a lot of plants being advertised as crossed with Ace of Spades that just look like green basic Anthurium. You get plants that are being advertised as being crossed with like Papillilaminum. But like, once you get into the Papillilaminum world, like, there isn't really just like Papillilaminum. Like, it's so much more complicated than that. There's so many different like breeding lines and ecotypes, and it's very rarely ever talked about with just like Papillilaminum, and that's it. Like, there's always some other descriptor with it. So that's kind of a red flag if they aren't saying like which specific Papillilaminum it is that's being crossed. Another red flag too is, even if they do provide pictures of what the parent plants look like, if the parent plants aren't particularly like spectacular, then like, what's the point of having bred them? Just to like pump out seedlings that people will overpay for. So another thing that I think is really a good sign is if somebody has said that we're offering a select number of these seedlings for sale because they were specifically showing the best characteristics of the batch. That's a good sign that the breeder is actively trying to create something that's going to be really nice. It's also really great when they have examples of seedlings that are grown out, so you can kind of see more of what the parent plant's genetics mashup is gonna maybe look like. Another red flag you'll see too is like, they'll say that a plant has been crossed with Anthurium dressleri, but like, Anthurium dressleri has very specific like petioles, kind of like how Magnificum has square petioles. Dressleri have kind of like ridged petioles. And so if you have a plant they're saying is part dressleri and the petioles are completely round, like, it's almost assuredly got no dressleri in it. So these are the kinds of things that, why would just like a casual hobbyist be held accountable to know? It's just so easy to misrepresent what you're selling when they're plants. So that's something to like take into consideration, is that in order to make sure you know what you're actually getting and you're getting your money's worth and you're buying what you think you want, the breeder should have all of the information about like where the parent plants came from, which ecotypes they are, like which generation they are. Is it an F2? Is it an F3? Was the parent plant selfed? Was the parent plant like bred to another of the same ecotype, of a different ecotype? Who did the person acquire it from? Is that person known as having a good reputation? Did that person get the plant ethically? Did that person sell an offset? Was it a clone? Was it a clone that was then selfed? Like, these are all important details, because when you're playing with these really expensive plants, these are all the things that are gonna come back and affect whether or not, if you ever need to sell the plant, like, you'll be able to sell it for what it is you think it is. Those are all really important questions to ask. Another thing too is, you know, references, reputation of the buyer. These are the kinds of things that like you're really gonna have a hard time verifying with just like buying from a Etsy plant shop or just buying from a plant shop that doesn't specifically specialize in Anthurium. There are like a couple really prestigious Anthurium nurseries out there. I think Tazula Plants is up there as like one of the most like prestigious nurseries. I know they've worked with Doc Block, and I think they've also worked with a few other really prestigious like breeders in the past. NSC Tropicals is pretty prestigious for some plants, but in the past they've also had some issues with incorrect pollen, like getting contaminated in with some of their batches, like their Carla Blackieyes this year, people are thinking are not actually pure. So even when you do everything you can and you think that you are getting your plant from someone whose reputation is pretty pristine. Accidents happen and you may not actually end up with what you thought you're getting. That is really important. Don't, hesitate to reach out and get references. And like, if you are feeling like pressured, like it's a purge situation, you have to make a snap decision and you just don't feel like you're all the way in it, like just don't do it. Just walk away. Like there's so few plants out there that are never going to be offered to you again. Like just, don't do anything that you are not 100% set on, and just understand that like if you pay $200 for like a papillominum hybrid from a plant shop and you think, oh, I can just sell it. Everybody wants Anthurium if I need to. Like, no, like you honestly like might really struggle to sell that plant. And like, I guess another red flag too, or just thing to keep in mind, is that like people who are like trying to sell things that they're giving like fancy names for, and it's not that it's a bad thing if somebody's like created something that's kind of cool and they've given it its own name. It's just sometimes like they're not deserving of like a special name. So a lot of times I think there's also people out there who are like trying to like hybridize every single thing that they have, trying to like make something to make a name for themselves that's like their like signature plant, and it's just like, not deserving of that. It's not needed. And the other thing too that you need to remember is that with Anthurium specifically, a lot of these plants that have specific names, things like Dark Mama, Voodoo Child, Crystal Hope, cultivar names, these are not categories describing like characteristics. These names don't cover every single thing that is the same hybrid as they're being called. Circus peanuts is another one. These names refer to very specific breeding lines of plants. And generally, if you have a plant that has some sort of special mutation that makes it special or cool or more valuable, the only plants that can have that moniker are clones of the original plant with the original mutation. Same thing with Delta Force. I think Delta Force and Circus Peanuts are the two best examples. Both of these plants, they were seedlings that had mutations that made them different from all of the other seedlings in those batches that were then grown out, and the only ones that count as Circus Peanuts or Delta Force are the ones that are actual clones of those plants. Even if you self-pollinate a Circus Peanuts or a Delta Force, it is not considered the original plant. It is Circus Peanuts selfed, Delta Force selfed. Because even when you self-pollinate a plant, all of the seedlings are gonna have like variations and different characteristics. So like if you are in the market for something like that, do your research, find out like the history of it. Like, is it a clone? How much do they actually go for? And like, yeah, maybe you can find stuff out there that's similar, that's not anywhere near as expensive. And if you're happy with that, then that's 100% totally fine. But like, just be aware that if you're trying to find something that's like a unicorn plant, and you're like, I'm looking for Anthurium Circus Peanuts, and somebody says like, oh, here, I have one for $200, like Dresslery X Versicolor, the Anthurium Circus Peanuts. Like, no, that is not what that is. I hope that information is helpful. If you have anything to add that like more helpful, like Anthurium shopping tips, please add them in the comments. If you have more questions, let me know. I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. And yeah, just, happy shopping, stay safe out there. But I would also caution you against buying things thinking that you're going to be able to like pollinate them and like make a bunch of money, because at this point, the people who are going to make a bunch of money selling Anthurium seeds and seedlings are the people who already have seeds in the process of cooking, because sometimes they can take like a year for the berries to fully ripen and then another year to fully grow out. So anything that you want to buy, do it because you intrinsically like it. And don't rely on thinking that you're going to make money off of it at this point. Like we saw what happened with philodendrons and monstera. The same thing's going to happen with Anthurium. The prices are going to go up, 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 up when people are still thinking that there's potential to make a lot of money. And then as soon as all of those seedlings are ready, they're going to flood the market. At first, people are going to buy. But eventually, once they start realizing that they can't actually make money off of them, prices are going to go down again. So I do think that some of the prestigious plants, like the pure species, like I think the Dresslery and certain like Papillium breeding lines and some of the other ones, they're always going to be, you know, pricier than the rest of Anthurium in general, but they're not going to stay $10,000. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to stay like printing money status of valuable forever. So hope that's helpful. Hope you had an interesting time. And that's going to be it for me for today. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.